Welcome to Rights and Remedies, the podcast where we explore the law, the fight for justice, and healing. I'm Allison Mahoney, your host and a lawyer dedicated to fighting for the rights of survivors of domestic and sexual abuse, as well as children harmed by the child welfare system. Each week, we delve into legal battles and court cases, share powerful stories that demand change, and spotlight the cutting-edge practices that are helping victims on their journey to healing. So, if you're ready to dive into the intersection of advocacy and healing, subscribe to Rights and Remedies today. New episodes are released weekly, and we can't wait to have you join the conversation. Together, we can make a difference. Welcome back to Rights and Remedies. Before we begin today's episode, please be advised that we'll be discussing some sensitive topics today, including abuse and sexual assault, which may be triggering for some listeners. If you need to take a break or skip this episode entirely, please do so and prioritize your own well-being. And without further ado, my guest today is Justin Boardman. He's a retired detective. He spent time in a special victims unit, and today he's an advocate for survivors and the founder of Boardman Training and Consulting. Welcome, Justin.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here. This is great.
Yeah. We met at a conference. What is it, like 2 years ago
At
now?
least,
Or
yeah,
a year
probably
and a
about two
half
years ago.
ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Um,
Important.
So can we start by can you give the listeners a bit of your background, share a bit of your background?
Sure. Well, I was in law enforcement for 15 years in West Valley City, Utah, which is an active suburb of Salt Lake. I've spent about 7 years in patrol and then went to investigations and quickly moved to the special victims unit, more so because they couldn't keep people in that spot due to the content and some of the volume that was going through there.
Is it like a
And
burnout thing for people?
burnout
Yeah.
thing and trauma thing and all of the above. And the sergeant came over and talked to me and said, "Hey, I used to work with you out in patrol, and you have the worst sense of humor in the whole department. Do you want to try this job?" And so I went over. I'd had some previous, I'd had a lot of calls out in patrol, mostly child abuse,
Hmm.
and I worked pretty well with those. And I also there's some sex abuse in my family in different places.
Yeah.
And so I said, yeah, I'll try it. And all of a sudden, I found a purpose and some traction in life and profession. I didn't become a cop till I was 33.
Okay.
And so I started late in life. And then a year into it, I attended a training with a person that ended up being one of my first training partners and a co-author of the Trauma Informed Victim Interview back in 2012. And I had learned about the neurobiology of trauma, and my life changed.
Hmm.
I realized that I'd been doing my job incorrectly.
Hmm.
I had messed up. I had closed cases before they were ready to be closed. I had treated what I thought was treating well survivors of sexual violence. I had treated poorly,
Hmm.
and that I didn't believe them and I didn't try. But on the kids' cases, we just kind of rock and roll and you went through the paces and you did the thing. But as soon as people turned 17, 18 years old, all of a sudden their experiences were liar, liar, pants on fire. And
Interesting.
this neurobiology of trauma turned everything on its ear.
Hmm.
And so the next 5, 6 years, I worked. I developed different models and helped out, joined different multidisciplinary teams, and helped change statute in Utah and addressed our sexual assault kit backlog and basically tried to repent through my casework by doing the best that I possibly can. And at about 15 years into my 20-year career, I was being asked to go all over the country to train. And at that point in time, the department, things got moved around and I got moved back out into patrol. And although it was fun being an officer, I didn't have any drive or meaning to
Mm-hmm.
do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was still leaving and going around and training. So I left 5 years early to get out and try to change culture from the outside. I pushed from the inside, and now I'm pushing from the outside.
That's an incredible story. Thank you for
Pretty much.
sharing. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
Um, I have several questions. I think one is, what are some of the key takeaways from what you learned? Like, what did you learn about trauma that was so different from what you had thought trauma, what you had thought about trauma previously?
Yeah. When we, in our experiences as police officers, and even in just regular life as regular human beings, the way that people present after they've been traumatized can be counterintuitive. And what I mean by that is maybe you have a kiddo and they steal the last cookie in the cookie jar, right? And you were saving it, and it's really just you and your kiddo in the household. And you ask them what happened to it, and they don't know that somebody else came in and ate it, one of their friends or whatever. And you go over and over their statements, and you do a little
Hmm.
investigation, and you finally get a confession because you caught him in this little inconsistencies, and you pounced on it and jumped on it and jumped on
Hmm.
it, so forth. And you caught him in a lie, and you were right. But when we are traumatized in different ways, we can present like somebody who is lying to us. And
Hmm.
as officers, people lie to us every day,
Hmm.
a lot, because they don't want to get
Yeah.
in trouble. I get it. But our victims, the way that they're presenting, looked like they were telling a fib. They weren't getting their story straight. They were leaving big gaps out. They couldn't remember things. And it was very consistent with that. So I was closing cases because of the circumstantial evidence that something bad happened to them. And there's a lot of guilt with that
Yeah.
comes.
How prevalent of a problem do you think this is within police departments across the country now?
It's horrible. It's in every single case. I have been training this topic matter across the United States, a little bit in Europe, a little bit in Canada. And when I go out and talk to 50 officers, there might be one or two people in that group. And I've been training it out there for almost 10 years. So it's huge. It's prevalent. It is part of the issues. And it's also part of the reasons why, some of the reasons why officers get a bad rap,
Yeah.
because we don't know what we don't know. And it's not that they don't want to do a good job, it's they just don't have the knowledge.
Hmm. Hmm.
And trying to change our systems and our laws and our cultures are extremely hard to do. It's
Yeah.
getting better a little bit, but not like you would want to see.
And what kind of changes did you help to implement in the statutes in Utah?
So I helped push a mandatory testing for sexual assault kits, helped bring strangulation from a misdemeanor crime to a felony.
Mhm.
I helped through one of my investigations change some administration law when it comes to foster homes and foster families and how that works within the state.
Mhm.
There were some places where some predators were exploiting. Helped get that changed and helped assist on a bunch of others, including part of the sexual assault kits and the funding for the brand new crime lab that was put in was also tied into this, but also mandatory trauma informed training at the police academy,
Okay.
although not enough. It's something to get
Yeah.
started.
Baby
And so,
steps.
yeah, exactly. And when you're trying to change these big, huge institutions, it's baby steps.
Hmm. Do most police departments have some kind of mandatory, like trauma-informed training?
No,
No.
no. There's a grant out there that is part of the Abby Honnold Act.
Mhm.
And Abby is a friend of mine, and she resides in Minnesota. And she was sexually assaulted at her college there. But the Abby Honnold Act helps provide grant funds to police departments to train um, in the neurobiology of trauma and trauma
Yeah.
informed victim interviews and so on and so forth. The problem is getting police officers or administration to write for those grants and to see it as an issue.
Right. Well, and I also imagine, I don't know, but what I would speculate that there's the training piece and then there's an implementation piece as well after they have the training.
Neurobiology of trauma is kind of phase two of justice reform. Phase one would be more mindfulness and resiliency training for the officers and the people within the justice system to be able to regulate their emotions and understand trauma so that they're not re-inflicting it. Our clients, if you will, are trying to at least achieve some sort of procedural justice.
Yeah.
It's the criminal justice system, it's not the victim justice system.
Can you speak to what the impact is on victims of sexual assault when law enforcement or the legal system is not responding in the way that it should, when it's not trauma informed?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of my people that I work with describe it as being assaulted a second time.
Mhm.
So certainly the sexual assault is horrific, but then they thought that the system was going to help make them whole or find some closure, or there might be a punishment. And instead, the justice system re victimizes victims just time after time after time after time in horrible ways. And in fact, it's prolonged, right? You're a prosecutor, you know these a lot of these cases don't run through the system really quick. It's prolonged for years
Yeah.
compared to their assault that was a smaller block of time, more likely than not.
Right. And during that time, they're reliving the experience over and over, and their attention is on the person who abused them in some capacity. So yeah, it's a lot. Your consulting company now, can you talk about which types of clients do you work with and what do you do? I know you do trainings, but
Yeah,
besides that,
so that's where most of my business is doing training for multidisciplinary teams. Anybody who will listen to me about the neurobiology of trauma, strangulation investigations, sexual assault, domestic violence, all of the above, right? And mostly for the justice system. So police departments, prosecutors, judges would be great, right? But we all know that that's hard to do. Victim advocacies. But I've also presented neurobiology of trauma to church groups before. Whoever
Mhm.
listened to me, I'll talk.
I mean,
And
that makes sense to me though, because that might be the first organization or group of people who someone discloses to,
absolutely it is.
right?
Yeah, are clergy. And a
Mhm.
lot of them are also mandatory reporters and so on and so forth. I also, healthcare is one of those,
Mhm.
and also human resources and personnel type of managers are also some of those that are disclosed to, because as well as if you have somebody who's stalking or someone who is significant other or intimate partner that is calling you on the phone all the time, wanting you to check in, that's part of your work and it interferes. And a lot of our survivors are fired because of what's happening to them at home. And if personnel managers are better informed and better trained
Mhm.
and are able to communicate on a better basis, they might be able to help them break the cycle and also not re-victimize our survivors, because that's where they can get some respite. That's where they have some income. All sorts of stuff is very important. So I'll train to those. And then I review cases for survivors. And usually I will just read through them and have a Zoom, kind of like what we're doing right now.
Is it a criminal case or civil cases too?
Anything. And I'll talk about their experience with them. And sometimes a lot of it is saying, hey, it looks like they did fairly well with what the investigation did with your experience. The problem is the delivery. And this is why, more likely than not, the case has declined. And here's some other options to see if we can help make you whole. Or, hey, why don't you try some civil stuff this way? Or shoot some emails. Let's push some buttons a little bit, because I really like to push buttons when it comes to the justice system. And sometimes I can suggest ways to do that. And then on the flip side of that, if there is a civil lawsuit and if it comes back in positive numbers for the survivor, a tiny little small percentage would be great to cover my expenses, because most of this is volunteer work and it is very time consuming and mentally consuming.
You are a bleeding heart.
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes I can find ways around, sometimes I can find ways to get cases reinvestigated, depending, and then if I have to write a report, sometimes I charge for that sort of time,
Yeah.
which is fair.
So you'll push for if law enforcement doesn't seem to, if it seems like the investigation is ending or over, you can help push for maybe them to investigate a little bit more and take another look at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or if the case is declined, which, as we both know, is more common than not,
Yeah.
and maybe we can take a look at it in a different way. I've found ways in different states to go at the justice system
Mm.
and put some pressure on them, and that's been good as well. Also, I've also assisted in helping survivors with press coming in and stuff like that, and
Mm.
helping organize some of that.
We had
And
talked before about resistance to some of the messages that you're trying to communicate and some of the advancements that you're pushing for. Where
yeah,
does most of the resistance to change come from? And do you have any sense as to why that is?
I think a lot of the resistance of change is there's a lot of personal biases out there, and we all have them. I have personal biases against raw onions, right? Don't like them, icky pookins. And, but we have them. And sometimes implicit bias, where you don't notice, also comes into effect. A lot of times, I don't get a ton of resistance teaching the neurobiology of trauma. I get some officers and people in the system to go, oh, that's pretty cool. That's interesting. And then they kind of keep doing what they're doing. Some people will go, oh my gosh, and it changes their perspective, like it did with me.
Mhm.
Sometimes I will get resistance. But what it gets down to is we are all so very short staffed.
Yeah.
Um, if you look at my caseload was about 300 cases a year. And my team had between 5 and 6 people working.
Just when you were working for the police department?
I was a detective. And so we start looking at the cases that come across and go, I've tried to investigate a case similar to this numerous times, and it's getting declined. And this one over here, they seem to be filing more of. So where do I spend my time?
Mm,
And it's horrible. If
yeah.
there was more help and there was more resources to investigate, would be much better and easier. These are marathon types of cases. They're not sprints. And the justice system, especially police work, is set up to be we respond to 911 calls, right? We go out, we put a band aid, and we go to the next call. And domestic violence and sexual assault is not just a one call and done, it's a series of events. And the system, the emergency system, is set up for one emergency at a time, not a series of events.
Hmm.
And so we get lost in all of that and the documentation. Why am I documenting? This was a verbal argument over XYZ. There was no laws broken.
Yeah.
Why am I writing this report? And it would be really short and gone. But then the next officer goes out in 4 months and is trying to determine a predominant aggressor because they both have, let's say, a scratch to their arm. We
Uh-huh.
need that history that the other officers didn't document because of the way that they've been trained to go in, put a band-aid, go to the next call.
Right.
It's a
Which
really hard.
unfortunately, I've seen a bunch of those cases where people call me, they're victims of domestic violence, and it was like it was a cross complaint basically, where finger was pointed at both people and said they're the abuser.
And a lot of times our survivors may be cited for being the abuser in this situation. That said, you can take a look at the history and the dynamics of the relationship, and that charge should never have been filed.
Yeah.
So sometimes I look at defense cases as well,
Hmm.
and I've done a lot of consulting on survivors that have been charged with false reports and some crazy stuff like that
Hmm.
as well.
That seems to be happening more and more lately
Absolutely.
too, and it's very traumatizing for victims. Can
In,
you?
in my in my 1,200 cases I was assigned,
Uh-huh.
I had two that I charged with false report, and I feel good that they were false. That said, did I actually need to charge one of them? One of them was certainly a mental issue. It did take a lot of my time. That said, where was the justice in that?
Yeah.
Probably didn't need to do that one. The other one was a juvenile, and that one, hopefully, the system, is structured differently, and it was a first offense for anything. So, that one I don't feel as bad with. But again, those are more other issues than just the false report. And
Right, right.
probably should not have done that. Hindsight.
I appreciate your openness and honesty about all of this.
Absolutely.
Um, can you share a story of like one of your cases and what it actually looks like?
Yeah, as far as consulting wise, there's one that has just become a documentary that's come out, and it's called Loud Enough.
Uh,
And Loud Enough is
Where can people watch the documentary?
right
Oh,
now, it is, you can order it for trainings and so on and so forth. It has not been picked up by a big distributor yet,
okay.
but Loud Enough Surviving Justice. And it's the case from Madison Smith's experience in Kansas in a small town. Madison was sexually assaulted in a dorm room by an acquaintance. It started off as consensual. Soon as the event started consensual, he started strangling her and assaulting her. And she tried to pry his hands off her throat and so on and so forth. And eventually went into what we call dissociation and tonic immobility, and which is all part of the neurobiology of trauma.
Mm.
After that event, she leaves and she reports fairly quickly, within about 24 hours, to her parents. And her dad was a retired police officer in the area. And they called the police. And The case was open for several years because the suspect, post Miranda, in an interview, says, yeah, it was just my kink. It was just something I wanted to see if she was into or anything. No, I probably should have asked, right? He didn't do any of the things that he needed to do. It was a sexual assault. He
Mm-hmm.
confessed to it, but the district attorney wouldn't file the case because she verbally didn't revoke consent. She didn't say no, but she was also being strangled to unconsciousness.
Okay.
Um,
Oh my gosh.
After a bunch of political moves and stuff like that, uh, he still wasn't going to press the charges on sexual assault.
Mm.
He eventually charged the suspect with strangulation because that was against the statute.
Yeah.
Um, and even though, the mechanism taking away the consent is the strangulation, anything
Mhm.
after that is going to be against statute, right? And a
Right.
lot of things happened after that.
Right.
He would not charge that.
Huh.
I found a law from the 1880s in Kansas, which is one of 6 states, because I like poking at the system, right?
Oh my gosh.
And what it did was it gave us an opportunity to go around the police department and to go around the prosecutor, do a petition drive to qualify for the judge to call a citizen's grand jury.
Wow.
This citizen's grand jury was impaneled. The judge did not do things according to the statute and filled in some gaps and stuff. We don't know exactly what happened inside the grand jury room because that is all confidential.
Yeah.
But they came back with a no true bill. And the
Mm.
rumor, since this is a small town, was that I found one of my other training partners to come in and volunteer and be sponsored by an attorney here in town to help represent Madison's rights in the
Mm.
state and in the grand jury. The suspect, they called the suspect in, and he didn't come in with any attorneys or anything. So they thought that that was telling.
I'm sorry, that was what?
That was telling.
Telling. Okay.
Yeah. And they also called the ex district attorney who declined the charges. We don't know what was said, but
Fascinating.
more likely than not, he was able to convince them that his decisions were correct, and although they were not. So it didn't come out with an ending that we had hoped,
Hmm.
but Madison and her family are extremely resilient and they fought. And she was able to find some closure in this. If you look up her case, his name is everywhere,
Yeah.
right? So, with the internet. So, Washington Post wrote some articles, but there is a documentary. You can find the trailer on YouTube, and I'll send that to you if you
Yeah,
get.
we'll add it. We'll add it to the show notes.
Yeah.
Incredible. Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing all of this information and for everything you do. I guess in closing, if there is a victim out there right
Mhm.
now who the victim of sexual assault or domestic violence who is really struggling in their interactions with law enforcement and to figure out what to do next,
Mhm.
do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, try to find somebody to help advocate for you. But one thing that you can do for yourself is to really think long and hard of what does justice look like to you in your experience. Does that look like a civil remedy? Does that look like fighting the justice system? Does it look like you being resilient and succeeding in life and having a happy family? Is
Mhm.
that well, your F you to the suspect, right? To the abuser. What does justice look like to you? And then have a couple other different thoughts about it, and then go for it. And it's okay not to go through the justice system.
Yeah.
It's okay not to go through the civil justice system.
Yeah.
It's okay. However, you can succeed and be productive in life, and that'll show them.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. Where can listeners find you? And if they're interested in if anyone's interested in hiring you for your training or consulting, where do they find you?
JustinBoardman.com works. And there's a portal there. Notalleged.com goes back to my website. But it's one of those hashtag things out there, because for decades and decades and decades, we use the word alleged, whether it's in print or in police reports, and it's the wrong word. Did it somewhere some time ago, somebody was sued for having alleged in something, and so it's an alleged homicide suspect. It's an alleged victim of sexual assault. It is the wrong word. If you look up the definition, it has a connotation of lying, and we have baked our biases in this type of language. So decade and generation after generation, it's been put into us and cooked and baked our minds, and our jury pools think of sexual assault, they think of alleged. It's the wrong word.
Well, hashtag not alleged.
Stated. Yeah.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we'll put your information in the show notes. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you for joining us on Rights and Remedies. I hope today's episode gave you valuable insights into the legal issues facing victims and the pathways to healing. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. Whether you're a survivor, an advocate, or someone looking to learn more, we're here to support and empower you. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. You can also follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at ALM Law LLC for updates, resources, and more. Until next time, take care and remember that together we can make a difference.